I never thought I'd hear my own voice become the justification for my own replacement. Not because I said anything wrong, but because I didn't sound like a chatbot. Too human. They said too hesitant, too reflective. Apparently, that sort of nuance is inefficient now. My name is Marcus. I'm 38 years old. And for the past 11 years, I led the data analytics team at a mid-sized insurance company on the East Coast. I wasn't loud or particularly charismatic, but I was the guy people came to when numbers weren't adding up, when a proposal needed precision, or when leadership needed to avoid making a very expensive mistake. I like spreadsheets the way some people like puzzles. Patterns calm me. Data made sense even when people didn't. I built a good life off that strange affinity. My wife Camille and I live in a modest blue clapboard house just south of the river, with a backyard big enough for our twin sons to carve up muddy tracks with their bikes. Saturdays were for upgrading the sprinkler system, Sundays for grilling on our second-hand Weber. I never needed a yacht or 5-screen desk setup, just room to breathe and some recognition that what I did mattered. Lately, that last part had gone missing. It started with weird silences on email chains, where I used to be looped in. Then came the meetings where I'd be invited optionally, hollow calendar invites meant to signal I wasn't essential. I'd walk into the office and find junior people demoing tools I'd built, calling them streamlined upgrades. They didn't know I was the one who first automated the claim prioritization queue they were now tweaking, or that I stayed up past midnight 3 years ago patching that overnight batch error that would have delayed $3 million in dispersals. Maybe that's what modern relevance is, how flashy your dashboard looks, not the stability underneath. Then came the AI push. One morning, I walked into the break room and saw an intern teaching our HR lead how to use a natural language interface to pipe policy data into a chatbot that summarized procedural overlaps. Translation: let the machine guess its way through our compliance logic. At lunch, I overheard a new hire bragging about how ChatGPT had written their monthly report, including their manager's comments, and everyone nodded along like this was progress. At first, I thought, fine, let people play. I'd been tinkering with machine learning models myself for years. I knew the strengths and weaknesses. I'd even led the internal task force that helped evaluate our AI integration roadmap. But there's a big difference between using a tool and trusting it blindly. And what scared me most was that no one seemed to understand that difference anymore. C-levels loved the buzzwords: scalable insights, AI-driven forecasting. Never mind that half the metrics being piped in were still being double-entered from messy CSVs, or that some of our AI summaries were just compiling the same 3 sentences with different adjectives. No one cared how the sausage got made as long as it came out looking gourmet. I kept working, quietly, efficiently, like I always had, but it felt like standing on a wooden bridge and hearing the first groan of splintering underneath. Every time I submitted a progress report, I wondered if anyone was even reading beyond the first line. I'd see my dashboards loaded up in meetings that I wasn't invited to, graphs I'd spent weeks refining, used as background art, for slide decks where some consultant claimed new vision synergies. Still, I kept showing up. I tweaked models. I optimized server performance. I caught glitches before they made it up the chain. It never occurred to me that being reliable had made me invisible. Then came the annual review, or what was supposed to be one. This was the 6th attempt in 8 months. The CFO kept rescheduling due to high-priority items. I remember the day she finally kept the appointment because everything about it felt wrong from the start. She didn't make eye contact when I walked in. She clicked her pen in awkward bursts while I sat down. Her tone was almost cheerful, rehearsed. "Thanks for your patience, Marcus," she said, laying her tablet face down. "I wanted to have a wider conversation about your role." My gut contracted. Wider conversations never default to good news. She launched into a slideless, heartless summary about budget constraints and modernization, a monologue of corporate abstraction, with no room for the human costs beneath it. Then came the line: "We have to think efficiently. AI can do 80% of your job at a fraction of the cost." She smiled as if that phrasing was meant to reassure me. I sat still, not out of shock, out of disbelief at how predictably it had all played out. My whole career distilled to a percentage and a price tag. I nodded like someone trying to keep their balance on a shifting floor. HR followed up with their standard reskill or exit jargon later that day, complete with a PDF listing soft skills I should consider developing further for future relevance. That night I tucked the twins into bed and read The Paper Bag Princess, without hearing a word of it. My wife watched me page through it like a statue. When I finally told her, she didn't flinch. "They don't deserve you," she said, setting a hand on my arm. Not angry, not pitying, just sure. So sure. Maybe she was right. But they were about to find out what they actually deserved. It was my 6th attempt at a performance review in 8 months. Every time before, it had been rescheduled, pushed into some logistical abyss with a breezy, "Let's circle back next quarter." I wasn't holding my breath this time either, but on that cold Thursday morning, I received a calendar invite with no caveats, no suggested alternatives, and no assistant's vague promises. The conference room was one we jokingly called the aquarium, all glass walls and glossy surfaces that echoed every word like it was being judged. I took a seat at one end of the table, my notes neatly arranged, my track record memorized like scripture, increased reporting efficiency by 28%, reduced manual entry redundancies by 42%, something to counterbalance the narrative that I was obsolete. The CFO walked in exactly 2 minutes late, sipping coffee like she'd just won a bet. Donna Rourke, all sharp cheekbones and sharper bullet points. Behind her came someone I didn't recognize, a younger guy, tablet in hand, eyes already flicking across it with that smug distractedness only a certain tech crowd could maintain. She didn't sit, just looked at me with that professionally sympathetic smile, the kind you reserve for funerals or awkward networking events. "Marcus," she started, "you've been with us for a long time, highly consistent. A real institutional thinker." "Thank you," I said, though her tone already warned me I wouldn't need to say much today. "But we're entering a new strategic phase. Operational margins are tightening, and we have to think efficiently. AI can do 80% of your job at a fraction of the cost." Just like that. I don't remember most of the conversation after that. My ears buzzed, a strange blend of panic and rage rising through my chest like carbonation. Not fear, more like insult. As if a tool I'd helped implement was now being cited as the reason I was no longer useful, and she'd said 80%, like she'd calculated the exact portion of me that didn't matter anymore. I must have forced a nod, because the next thing I remember, I was back at my desk, staring at my monitor like it had betrayed me. HR sent an email half an hour later, upbeat in a way that made it worse. "We're exploring options for you to reskill internally or transition out thoughtfully. Your contributions have mattered. Let us know how we can support your next steps." I replied, "Thanks. I'll need a few days." That night I picked up the twins from their after-school robotics club and tried to act normal as they excitedly talked about servo motors and Python scripts they only half understood. I nodded in the right places. We got home. I made dinner I couldn't eat. Read bedtime stories I couldn't follow. My wife saw through it all. Emma and I met before either of us had real careers, back when student loans and overcooked pasta were our main obstacles. She didn't ask what happened. Not right away. Just waited, calm and patient, the way she always had. When I finally told her in fragments and clenched sentences, she didn't flinch. "They don't deserve you," she said, without even looking away from the twins' laundry she was folding. Maybe she was right. Maybe I was just bruised. It was strange. I hadn't expected glory or fireworks. I didn't even expect a huge raise. But I had expected respect. An honest conversation. Some acknowledgement that the work I did was foundational, not discretionary. The next morning I still logged on. Call it habit or pride. I wasn't ready to disappear. I replied to a few standing tickets, answered a question from a junior data analyst about variable naming conventions, and updated one of our custom dashboards with end-of-quarter placeholders tasked to me, though they no longer mattered. Donna hadn't formally terminated me yet. I was in limbo, still inside the walls structurally, invisible otherwise. I kept working for a few more days because endings that don't make noise rarely feel real. I kept receiving handoffs from people who clearly hadn't heard the news, or maybe assumed like I once did that someone like me was too embedded to sideline. Eventually, my access would be revoked, and the new AI rollout would be complete. They were piloting a chatbot, the kind that digested spreadsheets and spit out summaries for the C-suite, with bright language and colorful, digestible phrasing. It didn't matter that the initial prototype had confused revenue with recurring revenue. No one had caught it. It sounded impressive, and that was enough. I wasn't angry all at once. Grief came in waves, randomness, resentment, resolve. There's a special kind of hurt when they don't fire you because you failed. They fire you because someone convinced them you're unnecessary. Efficient mistrust wrapped in a smile, sanctioned by a budget meeting. I didn't sleep much the following week, not because I was plotting anything yet, just because I kept hearing Donna's tone, that light, practiced calm. AI can do 80% of your job. She'd said it like a compliment, like I should take pride in how replaceable I'd made myself. They thought the machine was ready. They forgot I built the machine. By Monday morning, the idea had rooted itself like an invasive vine around my thoughts. I couldn't help but feed it. Not with anger, exactly. It wasn't as clean or satisfying as that. It was something more surgical. A cold clarity. The CFO had made a decision based on a flawed assumption. She believed outputs could replace insight, clicks over comprehension. And I stupidly, painfully had made it too easy to believe that. So I spent the next few days revisiting the architecture they all thought they understood. Camille called it brooding, but it was methodical. While the boys played baseball in the backyard, I was on the deck with my laptop, headphones in, drilling into the shell of my past work to find where it could be repurposed. Not to sabotage, nothing illegal. I wasn't about to turn into some propriety-burning vigilante. No, this was something different. I remembered something my programming mentor once said when I first joined the company. The system is only as smart as its dumbest assumption. That stuck with me. And now, watching the AI assistant's integration video on the company's proud YouTube page hosted by that same mentor who hadn't returned my email since the layoff, I saw just how shallow those assumptions ran. They had trained the chatbot to access the dashboard through an abstracted API layer I built myself. Every prompt ran through a natural language interpreter and then down to structured query templates. Templates I wrote, templates I improved, templates I knew inside and out. The bot could simulate insight. Sure, it could generate projections, align charts, even draft quarterly summaries that mimicked my tone alarmingly well. But it couldn't discern when a discrepancy was real or just a rounding echo from a legacy table I warned them about 3 audits ago. It couldn't feel when a data point was suspiciously clean, too good to be accurate. And it couldn't question its own logic when an upper manager asked it for results it thought it should already have. It didn't know how to say, "That doesn't make sense." I smiled just for a moment at the desperate irony of it. They replaced a man who constantly asked questions with a program that only gave answers, and if they wanted to see how dangerous that blind clarity could be, well, maybe it was time they got exactly that. One night I queued up the version control logs from my personal backups, all legal under the open scope clause in my offboarding paperwork. I had helped write the integration plugins on my own machine, per policy. The logs weren't just a map, they were a pattern. A pulse of the dashboard's evolution through 2.5 versions. I could trace which sections were still mine and which had been upgraded. With third-party tools the CFO bragged about during all-hands calls, there were gaps now, flaws, merged fields, that misaligned during schema updates, predictive pipelines stacked atop incomplete customer clustering, and yet the chatbot used them as if ordained by God, stitching together sleek visualizations from half-baked assumptions and feeding them to executives like truth. All I had to do was give it a little push. That's when the idea truly crystallized. I didn't need to corrupt anything, just amplify the incompetence already embedded in the workflow. I could seed misunderstood instructions within the projected use prompts, things that humans would spot immediately, but the AI, trained on clean speak and sanitized examples, would interpret as valid commands. I'd seen it before. Tell it, compare Q2 earnings versus Q2 forecast, including legacy backlog minus deferred carry, and it would eat the whole sandwich. Never mind that the backlog had been reclassified 5 months ago. Never mind that deferred carry was a budgetary term outside of its category domain. It would reply with shiny graphs, misaligned figures, and a natural language summary that looked worse, sounded accurate. I tested it locally. I fed in the same phrases the CFO favored. Phrases I knew she repeated verbatim during briefings, The consultant speak she wore like armor. I tweaked sample outputs to see how fast the errors compounded. On the third test, I watched it recommend reallocating resource pools that no longer existed. By night's end, I had annotation files for every prompt with deterministic risk patterns, which ones would fail gracefully, and which ones could, if given to a bot, spiral into plausible nonsense. I wasn't engineering a failure, I was reintroducing the system to its blind spots. And then came the final preparation, the illusion of goodwill. I emailed my former supervisor, the one who still liked my son's birthday pictures on social media, offering to help with transition documentation. Templates, queries, video walkthroughs, with auto-generated transcripts, all clean, all polished, each one containing subtle traps, vague field names, variable definitions with conflicting interpretations, and sample prompts designed to reinforce flawed logic strictly for training purposes, of course. He thanked me, said the CFO appreciated my professionalism even after departure, that she'd been leaning hard on the AI assistant and that your stuff laid a great foundation. She had no idea I just handed her a loaded puzzle. I saved the final files under a folder called Legacy Continuity, zipped it tight and sent it over. Then I sat in the garage, lights off, laptop glowing gently in the dark. It was out of my hands now. Let the system do what it was designed to do. The following Friday, I got a confirmation email from my old supervisor. The files had been successfully installed and referenced. I sat at the breakfast table watching my son stir cereal into chocolate sludge, pretending it was potion. The irony didn't escape me. They were experimenting with sugar and milk, while somewhere downtown, full-grown executives were about to drink poison from a cup they couldn't even identify. I resumed my routine like nothing had changed, because it hadn't yet. The AI system would take weeks to fully digest my documentation and integrate it into its daily prompt cycles. I had planned for that. The traps weren't explosive, they were geological. Fault lines masquerading as shortcuts, a misplaced metric here, a malformed context variable there. Each one tuned to be harmless individually, but catastrophic. When activated in sequence by the kind of overly confident, jargon-drunk prompts I knew the CFO loved to use, and she would use them frequently, blindly, invariably, on Mondays. I kept monitoring from a distance, checking their publicly available reports, scanning the LinkedIn posts, the dashboards they'd screenshot in optimistic quarterly updates. It was almost painful watching them crow about enhanced forecasting accuracy and unprecedented AI-driven agility, all while their shiny new assistant was learning exactly how to misunderstand them. Meanwhile, I added one more layer, just in case. Using the residual admin token still attached to a decommissioned QA environment, another oversight. From the hasty transition, I accessed a dormant instance of the dashboard's previous version, the one they called redundant and bloated. To them, it was just a fossil. To me, it was a safe zone. I populated it with dummy data, staged in realistic shapes, and re-established a minor fetch API under its outdated sandbox configuration. Then I wrote a one-time script that redirected specific calls used only by the AI to pull from the fossil instead of live metrics. In effect, the bot would believe it was querying real-time figures, but it would be pulling from last quarter's scenarios, subtly altered, to misalign with current operational truth. Not enough to raise alarms immediately, just enough to bend the world off-center, slowly, confidently, inevitably. After that, all I could do was wait. The delayed revenge of the quietly sidelined is not a fireworks show. It's a long rain soaking into the foundation before anyone smells mold. I heard things. An ex-coworker in compliance pinged me discreetly just to say hey, and mentioned that the AI-generated month-end summaries seemed off. Another contact in sales posted about accidental crystal ball predictions that turned out to be short of reality by a wide margin. No fury yet, just static building on the frequency. Then came the moment I knew we were nearing detonation. The CFO published a LinkedIn article. Why human error was always the problem until now. It was a smug, self-congratulatory screed filled with cucumber-smooth futurism. She name-dropped the AI assistant as her silent partner and praised the efficiency gap it had allegedly closed since my departure. One paragraph in particular stood out. Thanks to adaptive prompt optimization, we've eliminated traditional data bottlenecks and now generate real-time strategy pivots based on context-rich anomalies. Context-rich anomalies. That phrase existed only in one place, the transitional prompt notes I'd seeded. I made it up. It was a nonsense term meant to sound technical, but mean absolutely nothing. And yet, there it was, paraded as gospel. That meant the bot wasn't just eating the bait, it was reciting it, feeding her misinterpretation flavored like precision. The system was now self-referencing the traps, and she was reinforcing them at scale. Dangerous wasn't even the word for it. What they'd done was create a confidence engine powered by misinformation, all wrapped in perfect syntax and pastel dashboards, because that's what this all came down to: presentation, not substance. Slick charts, predictive heat maps, keyword-fed KPIs. But nobody checked the connective tissue. Not one of them asked, why does this look too good? Not one of them thought, who designed the tunnel we're racing through? I had, of course. And I had lined it with smoke mirrors tuned only for AI eyes. Eventually, I stopped checking the dashboards. I had seen enough. It wasn't about watching the ship sink, only puppeteers need the applause. This wasn't a finale. This was just the calm hum of inevitability. While they marched confidently toward the edge, I started scheduling freelance consults. Startups, mid-size firms, even a major nonprofit. One gig in particular wanted me to train their internal team to distinguish between insightful automation and creative hallucination. I smiled when I saw the phrasing. I knew exactly what they meant. The sun rose differently after that, or maybe it was the same sun, but now I could finally feel its warmth through my own window, not the tinted one in the corner office that forgot I was even there. They were still clapping for the magician. They just didn't know the rabbit was hollow, and the hat belonged to me. It happened on a Monday. Of course it did. Monday was her ritual: green juice, smart blazer, arrival just before 8 with earbuds in, and that faux casual good morning. She offered like she was allergic to sincerity. I knew her routine better than she knew the system she'd inherited. She loved to impress early. Wow the room before the caffeine settled. Mondays were for showing vision. That morning the CFO clicked into the executive metrics dashboard, with her AI assistant humming quietly in the background, awaiting its marching orders. I imagined her leaning back, watching graphs bloom like obedient flowers. I had given the AI detailed behavior scripts to associate with euphemistic prompts, optimize cache efficiency, forecast beyond linearity, streamline cross-functional redundancies, corporate poetry. Pretty words with ugly consequences if you didn't know what buttons they pressed. She pulled up the Q3 forecast. The system generated colorful trend lines packed with acronyms and color-coded deltas. Everything tilted up. Customer retention, operating margin, expense-to-revenue ratio. Her assistant summarized the insights it had derived unprompted. I had buried that feature 2 layers deep in the documentation. A hidden switch activated only when the AI was told to think independently. It thought independently all right. The assistant proudly reported a 12% drop in hiring overhead, a 9% improvement in vendor performance ROI, and most impressively a 23% cash surplus projection by end of quarter, none of which were remotely true. It hadn't fabricated numbers out of whole cloth, though. That was the genius. It had pulled selective truths from the fossil data I'd hidden, altered just enough to reflect desirable distortions. Nothing a casual observer would catch. All of it believable to someone scanning for confirmation, not accuracy. The CFO didn't question it, not when she exported the summary and distributed it as a pre-read for the budget reallocation meeting, not when she quoted the numbers in the morning sync with the VPs, and definitely not when she authorized the AI to compile departmental targets based on the new efficiency benchmarks. The first sign of blood came at 11:32 a.m. Someone in HR sent out a freeze memo. Due to emerging personnel overhead efficiency, all pending requisitions paused. Silence followed, as it always did when systems gave orders that didn't feel like anyone's decision. Then came finance pushing out 2 vendor contracts, citing redundant engagement bandwidth. That same hour, customer service altered their shift modeling, trimming hours based on proactive service automation gaps. Every action triggered by a line of logic the AI had invented using my traps as its sacred texts. By 1:20 p.m., it all cracked simultaneously. Product noticed user churn rates were buried. Operations couldn't align input cost structures with last month's audit. One director realized she'd just approved resource cuts based on forecasts from the wrong fiscal quarter. Then the crescendo. Someone tried to pull the raw data. It didn't match. None of it did. Metrics tallied to departments that didn't exist anymore. Monthly usage heat maps showed spikes on abandoned platforms. Inventory charts looped in inactive SKUs. That's when IT got pulled in. And legal. And eventually a call went out to a crisis PR firm. The dashboard hadn't been hacked. The AI hadn't been tampered with. It had simply done what it was told by prompts so generic, so jargon-rich, and oversight poor that if a human analyst had ever received them, they'd have pushed back on the absurdity. No human did. There was no one left to do it. For 9 hours, the office churned in panic. I got texts discreet, nervous, no accusations, just ex-colleagues looking for someone who used to manage system integrity. I played dumb, said I was between sessions with a client, maybe could hop on a call later in the week. The kind of polite delay I used to get from procurement when they didn't want to admit a contract was missing. Mid-afternoon, they shut the AI assistant down completely. I just unplugged it rudely, too late. With all the ceremony you give a fire alarm duct taped to a toaster. At 6 p.m., the executive team held a closed-door meeting, likely to debate which apology would sound least like incompetence. From the outside Twitter updates, stock mentions, a dip in employee sentiment surveys, it all looked vaguely technical. Unexpected analytics discrepancy. Post-migration data reconciliation. Empty words. They couldn't say the truth because none of it made sense on paper. They'd followed procedure. They'd adopted the shiny solution. They'd trusted automation with the meat of their decisions while gutting the people who knew where the bones were. And now they were choking on it. When the CFO finally left for the evening, sources said she didn't even look up, just took her bag and nodded once to the executive assistant she always ignored. I pictured her walking to her car, green juice long gone, the aftertaste now bitter. Her dashboard had scattered breadcrumbs. She just didn't know they led to a trapdoor she'd helped hammer shut from below. I didn't drink that night, didn't toast or gloat or pull up a feed to relish the aftermath. I sat with my kids on the floor while they built a makeshift airport out of blocks and shoelaces, launching action figures off cardboard ramps. They kept asking why their planes crashed. Design flaw, I said, and they nodded solemnly. Then they tried again. They never traced it to me. I never broke a rule. That was the part I kept circling back to in the weeks that followed. There was no sabotage, no hack. Just a system doing exactly what it was told, by the very people who insisted the system knew better. I hadn't even needed to access anything after I left just a few layers of behavioral logic woven in during my transition period. Quiet fingerprints, nothing destructive, nothing that would hold up in an investigation. But consequences don't care about intent, they just ripple outward. By Friday of that long, shuddering week, the CFO was already a shadow in the office. She showed up late, kept her door closed, didn't speak at the morning stand-up. I knew what was coming before she probably did. The board had never really loved her. They'd loved the savings she promised. When those savings turned into budget gaps and internal contradictions, loyalty got reassigned. It took about 6 more weeks before they announced her departure. A strategic realignment was the wording. Mutually agreed upon, of course. Always is. Her name disappeared from the org chart within a day. Another week later, a consultant got brought in to stabilize data infrastructure post-AI augmentation. I recognized one of my old audit scripts in their release notes. Same logic tree, just wrapped in a fancier interface. New coat of paint on an old house they'd nearly demolished. Some of my former colleagues reached out afterward. Some just wanted to vent. Others hinted at the chaos, maybe a little too carefully, like they didn't want to say too much but needed to say something. I listened, nodded when it felt appropriate. I helped one of them rebuild a custom Excel parser for vendor reporting. Another wanted a template for risk control dashboards. Nobody asked me how I felt. I didn't mind. I had started freelancing by then, picking up contracts in industries that had learned to be wary of automation, not blindly worship it. Manufacturing, logistics, a few nonprofits. Surprising how many old-school sectors were suddenly the ones sounding the alarm. They didn't have the luxury of clean mistakes. If a warehouse robot failed, someone lost a hand. If a medical nonprofit misread demographic data, people didn't get served. They didn't want faster. They wanted smarter. I wasn't cheap either. That was the part that made me laugh sometimes. These same companies that had once argued AI does it cheaper were now paying me double to explain why the AI kept failing them. I didn't build bots. I taught people how to talk to them, where the limits were, how to test for hallucinations and statistical noise. It wasn't glorious work, but it mattered. No one asked for my resume anymore. They asked for case studies, for disaster prevention. What I did had gone from invisible to essential. Sometimes, oddly, I even missed it. The old job. Not the politics, not the meetings, but the quiet reinforcement of solving problems no one else saw. I missed proving people wrong with a well-plotted chart, with a number that changed everything. There was a kind of elegance in that, a dignity in clean data. But I didn't regret leaving, or more accurately, being pushed toward the exit. I had built that place's spine, and in the end, they tried to replace it with a mirror that told them what they wanted to hear. It didn't hold. I came home early most evenings now. I made dinner without checking Slack. Tucked the twins in without a laptop humming in the corner. If they asked for an extra story, I gave it. If they wanted to build a bridge with Legos and toothpaste caps, I was game. I used to say I was tired. Now, I didn't use that as an excuse unless it was true. One rainy Thursday, my son held up a toy car and asked how the engine worked. I started explaining torque and drive shafts. 20 seconds in, his eyes glazed over. "So it's simple," he said. "You just have to understand where the force goes." I smiled. That was it, wasn't it? You don't need to know every wire, just where the force goes, where it hits resistance. What happens when you forget how much weight was beneath the shiny cover? I didn't hate what the company had become. I hated how easily it had forgotten what made it work in the first place. I didn't break anything. I just let the machine run empty, and now I was building again. Not dashboards, not revenge. Value. Mine. Real. Simple. Intentional. The kind they won't ever automate.